break my own rule and drinking on stage here. I think I'll break it again. You tell me you can only get this around here, is that right? Well, I know why. You're keeping it a secret, you greedy.
Hello, classic rock fans. I'm reporting just a couple of days after seeing John Fogerty on his Celebration tour, which visited Milwaukee this past weekend. The opening band on the bill was George Thorogood and the Destroyers, and it was a fantastic show. The concert was at the American Family Insurance Amphitheater, which is on the Summerfest grounds here in Milwaukee, but it was not a part of Summerfest itself. This was my 5th time seeing John Fogerty in concert. In fact, I saw him not too long ago. I saw him 2 years ago at the BMO Harris Pavilion at Summerfest in 2022. Pretty much everything I said in that review still applies today. So in an effort to not repeat myself, I would just invite you to check out that video I posted from 2022. And I'm going to spend the majority of this video talking about George Thorogood because I have not had a chance to talk about him on this channel just yet, and I have some thoughts. Although I will touch on John Fogerty's performance at the end, so I'm not totally skipping out on that. But let's talk about George Thorogood and the Destroyers first. So this was the second time I've seen George and his band. I previously attended a concert of theirs at the Pabst Theater in Milwaukee back in 2017. That was a particularly memorable show for me because I had really good seats. I was like 2nd or 3rd row, really up close. I got lucky when buying my tickets for that. And it was a lot of fun. My takeaway from that night, and also my takeaway from this show I most recently saw about George, is that my goodness, that man is such a ham. And I mean that in the best possible way. What I mean by that is he is very funny on stage, and he is all about being that rock star character. One of the things I remember from that 2017 show at the Pabst Theater, because I was sitting up so close, I noticed this. He was posing for photos in ways I really haven't seen rock stars do before. I mean, he was like looking directly at fans' cameras and phones. You know, a lot of artists get kind of shitty about fans taking pictures during shows. Not George. He was all about it. He was coming up to the front of the stage, posing with his guitar, making funny faces, totally leaning into it. So yeah, he was just being himself, just being a lot of fun on stage, you know, talking with that rock and roll swagger and doing these big, you know, guitar poses and facial expressions. He's like mugging at fans' cameras, you know, for their pictures. It made for some fun. The audience really appreciated it, I could tell. And I was up close, and I got a couple of half-decent pictures on my phone. All that applies to the show I just saw this past weekend. I was not nearly as close. I was further back, but I could see him running up and down the front of the stage, you know, kind of jawing at the people in the front rows, again, making these kind of goofball jokes. At the start of his set, he said something like, "I have good news, ladies and gentlemen. The parole board has offered us a one-night exemption, so we are free to rock and roll for you." Something to that effect. Something about him and his band being out of jail to come and rock at the amphitheater for us. That's funny. And then he kept on. He was just like, "I am not afraid to go to jail for rock and roll." It's not exactly what he said. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember perfectly. It was funny, though, because it's just so cheesy. And he was getting the crowd on its feet, which is what I remember from when I saw him in 2017. Like, he really got the audience to engage. So I think he was an excellent pick for a John Fogerty tour, because John Fogerty is a little older than George, but he also has that same energy, and he can also still sing very well. Well, I'll talk about John in a moment. Let's go through George's set list here, because it wasn't very long. Most of these songs themselves were a little longer. He did some jam sessions on each of them, but the number of songs wasn't that much. He opened with a song called Rock Party, which was off, I believe, an album he was promoting on that 2017 tour I saw. That song's pretty good. It struck me as something written specifically to open a concert, because the lyrics are about having a party, a rock and roll party, and that sets a tone. So maybe not the most memorable song ever, but certainly one that absolutely does the job of opening a show. So that was fun to see. And then, of course, he goes into one of his classics, his cover of Who Do You Love?, originally by Bo Diddley. Man, what a great freaking song that is. I'm not going to say it's better than the original, but it's one of those covers that gets close. From there, he did another song I wasn't familiar with called Mama Talk to Your Daughter, that had kind of some funny lyrics, so I think it worked. You know, there's a lot of songs in his catalog where humor is a part of the lyrics, and I think that's a big part of his appeal. Okay, after that, he gets down to business. I Drink Alone. Okay, that's his best song. That is one of the best blues rock songs of the 80s. That's my pick for the best song about drinking ever. Maybe I gotta couch that, but it's up there. I Drink Alone is such a great freaking song. So that's the appeal for me right there. I will go see George Thorogood pretty much anytime, if only to see him play I Drink Alone. And while we're talking about I Drink Alone, let's not think about the subtext of the lyrics in that song. Let's not think about what the narrator is actually saying in those lyrics, because that will definitely ruin the good time we're having, in the same way that if you really think about the lyrics of Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville, that will also ruin the good time you're having. That went into his medley of House Rent Blues and One Bourbon, One Scotch, and One Beer. One Bourbon, One Scotch, and One Beer, another Hall of Fame drinking song, another fun one to sing along with. The crowd was definitely getting into that. I like that song a lot. I actually have a funny story about that song that has nothing to do with any of this, but I'll tell it really quick. When I was in college, I worked as a bartender at a banquet hall. And there was a bowling alley in this banquet hall. And I was working in the bowling alley. And near the end of the night, there was a couple sitting at the end of the bar, husband and wife. And through the whole time they were there, they were having some sort of conversation about some serious topic, because the wife looked pretty unhappy the whole time. And the guy just had this kind of dopey, humdog, kind of happy, kind of sad expression of like, yeah, it's bad, but what can you do? You know, I don't know what the problem was, but, you know, the wife was upset and the guy was trying to get on a different topic maybe, or trying to see the bright side. And near the end of the night, actually right before close, I go up to him to tell him it was last call, and someone had played One Bourbon, One Scotch, and One Beer on the jukebox. So as I get up to them, you know, I say, hey, it's last call. Is there anything I can get for you? And the guy hears the song, and he looks at his wife, and he gets this kind of grin, and he turns to me, and he's like, I'll have one bourbon, one scotch, and one beer. And then he looked back at his wife with a really dopey smile, as if he had just knocked it out of the park with comedy. And she did not sell at all. She did not go for it. She just stared at him with a very irritated expression. On a side note, if you place a drink order like that, like, the bartender does not have enough information, so I couldn't even roll with it. I had to then respond, okay, which ones? Yeah, you know, on a side note, you know, for my younger viewers, if you ever think about going into bartending for like a part-time job or something, it can be a fun gig, but, you know, just be aware you're going to have some incredibly depressing encounters from time to time. Okay, back to the show. The next song that George played was a cover of a song that I think is most famous for being done by Johnny Cash. And before he played the song, he talked about that he had a chance to meet Johnny Cash at least a couple of times. He said something like, one of the best things about my career is that I got a chance to meet Johnny Cash. And people applauded, but not loud enough. So he said, let me say that again. One of the best things about my career is that I've had a chance to meet Johnny Cash. And then the audience really, gave it up. And yeah, I thought that was great. I mean, he's paying tribute to the artists he's covering, because here's one of the big things about George Thorogood. He's not really a songwriter. I mean, most of his hits are covers. I mean, One Bourbon, One Scotch, and One Beer is a cover. I bet you didn't even realize that. Well, the cover that he played that Johnny Cash made famous, because it wasn't a Cash original either, was a song called Cocaine Blues. I like that pick because that's not like Ring of Fire or Walk the Line or any of the just obvious Johnny Cash covers. I like that this one's a little bit more obscure, but not like deep in the catalog. I think people know the song Cocaine Blues, and George did a good version of it. From there, he did Gear Jammer, which is an appropriately named song because it is a jam, and they jammed on that for quite a while. It was fun. He did another song called Get a Haircut, which I was not terribly familiar with. And then, of course, the last song of his set was the big hit, Bad to the Bone. Now, what I will say about Bad to the Bone is that that is one of the all-time examples of a song that is great, but has kind of been ruined by the overexposure it has had with, like, commercials and TV shows and movies. It's kind of like Born to Be Wild by Steppenwolf. It's just been used too many times, and it's lost a lot of its punch, at least to casual fans. Now, if you're a more dedicated fan and you don't want to like surrender these songs to the pop culture effect, you have to make an effort to listen with fresh ears when you have a chance to hear them played. And that's the nice thing about seeing artists in concert. They're not playing you a recording of the song, he's playing it live. So if that's a song that you hear and you roll your eyes, because again, you think of all the commercials, try to listen with fresh ears if you can see him in concert. And don't discount seeing him just because that's his most popular song and it's been overused. Because if you can get it away from all those associations, it's still a damn good song. And it really embodies his rock and roll character. Make an old woman blush, make a young girl squeal. That is exactly the kind of stuff he says in his rock star character on stage. I mean, it really fits. So, yeah, you have to build a new context. If you see him in concert, he's the guy from that song. When George is on stage, he is the guy from Bad to the Bone. And in the context of the concert, there is no commercials with that song. It's just the song, and it's just the guy who plays the song. So maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of this than I need to. But I know that Bad to the Bone is one of those songs like Born to Be Wild or perhaps Like a Rock by Bob Seger that the culture kind of ate up in a way that made a lot of people forget about how good the original piece of music is. Oh, I should also mention that right before he played that song, he also said, one of the best things about his career is that he's now been able to work with and become friends with John Fogerty.
And we're proud to say in our lifetime, we got to know and be friends with and play with John Fogerty.
I thought that was a really nice salute to John, because I don't know if George has ever covered a Creedence song, but if he did, I think that would be appropriate, because there's definitely a connection in the music that John Fogerty played with Creedence back in the 60s and what George was doing with the Destroyers in the 70s and 80s. This was a really good package tour, is all I'm saying. And not just because of the connective tissue, because these guys were evenly matched with energy and vocal abilities. Again, I don't want to harp on this too much, but George Thorogood is 74. John Fogerty is 79. But both of them were moving up and down the stage, jamming on their guitars, and most importantly, singing very well. And both had a lot of enthusiasm. I do not take that for granted for classic rock artists, because it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of strength, it takes a lot of stamina to do that for a full show, and both of these guys prove that they are still very capable of doing it. To me, it's crazy that Fogerty is still able to do this. He's 79. I mean, besides maybe Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney, I think he's the only one who can still do this with that level of energy. I mean, he's only 2 or 3 years younger than Bob Dylan. And Bob was almost immobile the last time I saw him, and no disrespect to Bob. Oh, okay, here, I'll just throw this one out there. Joe Biden is 2 years older than John Fogerty. And there is such disparity in energy and movement and, like, oh God, I'm sorry, mental clarity that Fogerty, like, actually made a little joke about Joe Biden during the show. I forget exactly what he said, but it was, you know, again, something that was making fun of Joe Biden for being, like, really old and not with it. And again, this is coming from a guy who's just 2 years younger than him. So, you know, it just says a lot to the shape that Fogerty's kept himself in and the enthusiasm he has for the show, the love he has for his audience. He's very appreciative to the crowd. A big part of this tour, I mean, is the name. It's the Celebration Tour. And what he's celebrating is the fact that he finally, at long last, after a lifetime of legal battles, got the rights to his Creedence songs back. Fogerty famously had one of the worst record deals in rock history, and when Creedence broke up, he went into a very deep depression. He had some very bad writer's block, basically sat out the 70s and early 80s, put out virtually no music, finally had his comeback in the late 80s, but was not playing Creedence songs. And he didn't play Creedence music for so many years that it's become this commonly held myth that he was legally prohibited from playing Creedence hits because he had such a bad record deal or something to that effect. That's not true. He chose not to play Creedence songs for a very long time. But if you look into the legal battles, the endless lawsuits, and the just absolutely awful record deal he had with his label, you could understand why he, for many years, was very burnt out and just unhappy about his Creedence legacy. It wasn't until, I think, either the late 80s or the early 90s that he had a mindset change. And a big part, and this came a little bit later, and a big part of, you know, him kind of finding his way again and kind of escaping these dark years was he got married to his current wife, who every time I have seen him play, he has given her a shout out. And what he said at this most recent show is that it was his wife who basically led the charge against his old label to get his songwriting back, to get his publishing back, to get the rights to his original songs back under his ownership.
It was actually my dear wife that got this accomplished. You girls know that behind every man, there's a great woman. Well, she's the one that stared down those evil lawyers and those greedy record company people, and they kept saying no, and she wouldn't take no for an answer, and by golly, she got her done, and I got my songs back.
Which is a big deal. It's obviously very important to him because being screwed out of those songs was such a, in a negative way, a defining aspect of his legacy. Well, now at long last, those songs have come back to him, and he is celebrating that fact with this tour. He also told a great story about how after Creedence had broken up, he had just given away one of his most precious guitars to some kid because he was just so depressed about Creedence and didn't care about anything. And then, like, decades later, again, his wife, Julie, tracked down that guitar somehow and gave it to him as a Christmas present. That's incredible. So, yeah, John Fogerty as married a great woman and gave her a lot of love and affection from the stage. Of course, if you didn't know, his two sons are in the band with him. So this is very much a family band. So real quick, I'm not going to go through the full set list of John's show because there's just too many songs. I mean, yeah, he did mostly Creedence songs. And, of course, they were the big hits. And there's just so many of them. I will just say the deep cuts of this set list that I had not heard before included a Creedence song called It Came Out of the Sky, which was a cool addition because that one's about aliens. He did a song that he originally recorded when Creedence was under their old band name, the Gollywogs, and it was a song called Fight Fire. Not the best song I ever heard, but a cool little piece of rock and roll history. During the encore, he came out to thank the crowd for keeping these songs in our hearts and basically to raise a toast to the audience. And he was really playing to this crowd because he came out with a 6-pack of New Glarus's Spotted Cow, which of course is the most popular beer in Wisconsin. You can only get it in Wisconsin. And it was just cool to see him, drink that on stage and say some nice words about it. And then the last thing I'll mention real quick, one of my favorite things about seeing John in concert, at some point before a song, I don't remember which one, he started noodling on his guitar and did like a 2-minute guitar solo. But during that solo, he was like finger tapping and, hitting the whammy bar. And it was like a dead ringer for something like Eddie Van Halen would play back in the day. There was a moment where I thought, is he playing Eruption? Because it sounds really close to being Eruption. And again, being that Fogerty is a 60s guy, or at least known as being a 60s guy, you don't think of him as like a guitar maestro, but he is. And that's just awesome to see. So I always like that. It absolutely blew my mind the first time I had seen him in concert, and it still impresses me today. I will say the one downside about this whole concert, there's a lot of empty seats. There are so many empty seats that I don't think they picked the right venue for this tour. When I saw John in 2022, he played at the BMO Harris Pavilion, which is a smaller venue on the Summerfest grounds, and it was totally full. It was a big, great crowd. John and George this past weekend at the AmFam Amphitheater, I would guess more empty seats than not, unfortunately. And that's probably at least partially because there was no ticket discount, at least not one that I noticed in the days leading up to the show. They probably could have sold a few more seats if they had dropped ticket prices. Yeah, so it might be a pricey ticket, but I'll put it like this. If they're coming to your town, buy the cheapest ticket, and then the day of the show, check where there are big gaps of seats. Go in early and find your way to a more expensive section. That's probably the best way to do it because, again, I don't know how well they're selling in other markets, but there was a lot of open seats for this show. Definitely opportunities to perhaps get in at the lowest ticket level, but still get a half-decent seat. So, all right, well, that's all I got for today. Thank you very much for watching this review. If you've enjoyed this review, please check out some of the other reviews of live shows I've seen in the past. If you like classic rock, I guarantee I've talked about a different artist or band that you're a fan of, or at least curious about. And if you are that fan of classic rock, please check out the podcast I do. It's all about classic rock. We've had a lot of great guests on this year, and we have a lot more fun stuff coming up soon. So please check that out, and also find us on social media. Links in the description below. With that, thank you so much again for watching, and keep rocking.